gonna tell you guys about the time that my entire class teamed up to take my teacher down. And by down, I mean fired, which is terrible, but... And to be clear, I wasn't involved in the incident. I was just asked in to be a witness along with the rest of the class. If you're not interested at this point, like, I don't even know. So when I was in 6th grade, I had this teacher called Mr. W. We're gonna call him Mr. W. He was our science teacher. And he was fine. He wasn't, like, amazing or bad. He was just okay. He did smell, like, really, really bad. But again, that didn't affect his teaching at all. One day, however, I don't even know how this happened. He asked us all to get started on our work. He was a little irritated that day. I don't even remember why. One of the girls in our class, her name was Summer. She didn't have her workbook. Mr. W asked her where her work was. I didn't bring it today. They started arguing. The rest of the class was kind of silent, just watching this. She's a nice girl. She wasn't attacking him or anything. He did, however, get very angry. So angry, in fact, that he grabbed his binder and threw it across the room over her head. It just barely skipped her head and slammed on the floor. This wasn't like an empty binder from the dollar store. It was a teacher binder full of work. We were all silent. Summer stopped talking. Look for part 2.
Here's a story time of how me and my sisters almost got kidnapped. So my mom and her boyfriend were just going to go out and have a night to themselves, and I was home watching my 2 little sisters. At the time, I was 13, my 2 little sisters were 9 and 6. So around 6 p.m., my mom and her boyfriend leave. Me and my sisters just sit down and watch a movie, and then I get up to make them dinner. I get paranoid really easily, and while I was making them dinner, I look out the kitchen window, and I thought I seen somebody in the backyard. I text my mom and she gets on the cameras that are outside and she said nobody was out there. I continue making them dinner, we sit down and eat, and then we start watching another movie. Then we start hearing knocking. It wasn't coming from any of the doors, it was coming from the side of the house. I didn't want to bother my mom on her one night out, so I just took the kids and we went upstairs and watched a movie in my room. My 6-year-old sister at the time went to the bathroom and she came back in literal tears. She was literally crying so hard until I finally got her to stop and tell me what was wrong. She said as she was walking back from the bathroom, she seen somebody downstairs. I quietly locked my door and I put my sisters in the closet and I called my mom right away. I'm running out of time, like for part 2.
Storytime Tinder edition. Okay, the story blew up on Twitter like a while ago, but I'm just gonna retell it because it's very informational. So there was this guy and this girl, and they met through Tinder, and then they met up and they went on this date. And they were out at dinner, and then she starts not feeling so well. And then she says, I really need to go home. And he says, yeah, I'll drive you home. And she says, okay. So then they get to her house, and then she starts feeling better. So then she says, do you want to come in for some coffee? And then he says, yeah, sure. So they go inside, they have their coffee, and then she doesn't feel well again. And she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't feel well again. I think you really need to leave. And he's like, okay. And he leaves. And then she goes to bed, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up, and she hears this noise down in her kitchen. And so she locks her door, and she calls the cop. And the 911 operator is just on the other line saying, can you just stay on the line until the cops get there? And then the cops get there and they're like, the door is locked. Like, we don't think anyone's inside. And she's like, I promise you, someone's inside my house. I can hear them. She says, you have my permission to break down the door. So she's still up in her room, and then she hears the cops break down the door. And then she hears some wrestling and some fighting. Part 2.
Alright, y'all, so I'm gonna be doing a quick story time. So when I was younger, this is what I used to use to start learning how to do nails. So I taught myself how to do nails when I was like 16. I'm 19 now, about to turn 20 on September 26th. Ow! Anyways, but this is what I started using, the Kiss Kits. I got one for Family Dollar, and I got me a little drill or whatever. But that Kiss Kit comes with every single thing that you need to start doing nails, because I didn't want anything too expensive, and I didn't know what I was doing. And this was perfect for me learning how to do stuff. So these are the new, what are those things called? Girl, I forgot what those was called. Chalk that I'm using, and this is where I get my glitter from. It was at Michael's. The chalk was $5, and I was thinking about using those roses for
Crazy story time about how my sister and I found out that we were hooking up with the same guy. So I was a freshman, my sister was a sophomore, and there was this really cute guy in her grade that I liked. But I could never find a way to talk to him because we weren't in the same grade and had none of the same classes. And my sister and I were not close at all. Like, we didn't tell each other shit. We didn't really talk to each other or anything. So by that being said, we never told each other about the boys that we liked. We just didn't have that bond. Well, track season came around. So they called all the people down who wanted to do track. And I saw him walk past my classroom window, so I decided to go too. So I signed up for track, and him and I started to talk a little bit. We exchanged numbers. And he was popular, I wasn't, so he didn't want to be seen with me. So after attendance, we would go to this graveyard right by the track and hook up. Well, the next day, we had a meet at our school. So him and I went to the graveyard, hooked up, and that's when it started getting crazy, like for part 2.
Y'all, please! I will never hang out with a white boy again. This white boy came to pick me up because, you know, I was trying to get that little diddly dick. And as soon as we get into the car, he's smiling at first, and then he starts looking at me weird. I'm just like, okay, whatever. So we drive to his house. His mom is I'm not gonna be able to get through this. His mom is there and she looks fucking terrified when she looks at me. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm probably the first bad bitch that he brought to this house. I'm sorry. So we go into his room. We're just chilling, watching a movie, whatever. And then his mom pulls him out of the room. When he comes back, he asks me, do you need to go to the hospital? I'm like, no. Why the fuck would I need to go to the hospital? He looks at me. He's like, oh, me and my mom noticed that your scalp is peeling off. It was my fucking lace. My fucking lace, friend. I'm like, what? And I run into the bathroom and I'm looking in the mirror. I look in the mirror and I see a whole part of my lace is lifted up. Once I told him it was my hair, he got mad and called me a catfish. He made me Uber myself.
Story time about my psychotic best friend. So we're gonna call this girl Gia. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 9th grade. I saw Gia sitting at this lunch table alone and I invited her to come sit with my friends and I. And after talking to her, I found out that she was a new student and she didn't have any friends. So her and I started hanging out and we became really close. Like, she would come over my house 24/7. Well, my older sister was a grade above us and she would act really weird around her. And by weird, I mean like she would always make fun of me in front of my sister. And weirdly enough, try to cause problems between us. My sister didn't really like her. She thought that she was weird. But because she was my friend, she was being super nice to her. Well, like a month later, she started trying to become best friends with my sister. Like any conversation she would have, I would be like, oh, do you want to come over? She would be like, no, sorry, I'm hanging out with your sister today. And I would go home and I would be like, hey, are you hanging out with Gia today? And my sister would be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like for part 2.
I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister and her name's Ashley. And we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking. And my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, you need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night. And I look at him and I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night. Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, no. He's like, no, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her. So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, we don't go into each other's rooms, do we? And we agreed that we do not. And they said this has been going on for months. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep. But it only gets worse.
Kidnapping rate in Detroit is so high a woman can't even go to the store alone anymore. I went to Myers and I bumped into a guy in an aisle. He was really, really tall with long hair. And I was like, oh, my bad, excuse me. He looked down at me. He was like, oh, no, you good. Next thing I know, every aisle that I went to after that, he somehow ended up in the same aisle. So I tested the dude out to see if he was really following me or if maybe I was going crazy, So I went to the tampon aisle over by the makeup and all the women's products. Why he end up in that aisle too? So then I started taking my sweet ass time trying to see if this man would leave, which he never did. So I went to self-checkout and deliberately checked the product wrong. When assistants came, I told them, hey, look, it seems like this dude's been following me all this time. Can somebody walk me out to my car? They sent one of the guys that wrangle up the cars to walk with me. So I finished my checkout and me and the Myers employee walked out together. And he and I both noticed this man following me to the car. And then he walked 4